My wife let her divorced friends completely tank our marriage with all their talk of freedom. The second I knew what was up, I took off the ring, filed the papers, and got my revenge by letting her face the regret. Listening to her newly single squad was the wake-up call I never saw coming. But let me lay out exactly how it went down and how I made sure she got precisely the kind of independent life she was asking for. It all started about 3 months ago when she reconnected with Skylar, her old college roommate from Arizona State University, ASU. This woman had just gone through a nasty split in Dallas, Texas, and was suddenly back in town in Denver, Colorado, looking for someone, anyone, to validate her life choices. My wife, who used to be stoked to come home and tell me about her day, started showing up with a totally different vibe. "The girls think I settled too young," she announced one Thursday evening, not even bothering to look up from her phone. She was glued to a group chat that had somehow become more important than our dinner conversation. I looked at her across the dining table in our Denver Highlands apartment. "The girls? Which girls are we talking about here?" "You know, my college friends, they're all hanging out regularly now. They keep saying I missed out on so much by getting married at 25. Here's the thing about my wife, Chloe. She used to be the kind of person who made her own decisions. She was confident, independent, and never needed anyone's stamp of approval. But suddenly, every conversation started with, 'the girls say.' Or, according to the group. This group was a trio of women. Skylar, the old roommate, who had just divorced her husband after he caught her cheating. Brittany, another friend who was 34, single, and spent her weekends bar-hopping on 17th Avenue and complaining about how all the good men were taken. Madison, who'd been married twice and was currently living back in her parents' basement in Littleton after her second divorce. These were the women Chloe had suddenly crowned as the experts on life and relationships. "What exactly did you miss out on?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "We traveled all over, bought this place, built our careers. What part of that was settling?" She rolled her eyes in a way that was completely new. "You don't get it. They're saying I was too young to know what I really wanted. That I should have experienced more before committing to one person forever." The irony was not lost on me. Here were 3 women whose collective relationship experience was a series of massive failures, and they were giving marriage advice to someone in a stable, genuinely happy marriage. Over the next few weeks, the changes were impossible to ignore. She started going out every Friday and Saturday night with the crew. She'd roll in late, sometimes after midnight, reeking of smoke and cheap liquor, with stories about how free and alive she felt. Our Sunday morning routine of making pancakes together completely vanished. She'd sleep until noon, then spend the entire afternoon texting the group about their night out. When I'd suggest we do something together, she'd let out a dramatic sigh and say, "The girls are right. You're too controlling." Controlling? For wanting to spend time with my own wife? The house started reflecting her new priorities. Dishes piled up because she was too busy living her life to worry about mundane things. Laundry became completely my job. She'd leave for work in the morning without so much as a goodbye, but I'd see her posting pictures with her friends on social media, looking happier than she'd looked at home in months. "They're teaching me things about myself I never knew," she told me one evening, applying makeup for another night out. "Like how I've been suppressing my true personality to fit into this domestic role." I watched her in the mirror. This woman I'd built a life with was talking about our marriage like it was a prison sentence. "And what exactly is your true personality?" "Fun. Spontaneous. Young." She turned around, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the person standing there. "The girls say I've been acting like an old married woman when I should be enjoying my 20s. "You're 28. "Exactly. Still young enough to start over if I wanted to." That phrase hit differently, start over. Not improve our marriage. Not work on herself within our relationship, but start over. As if everything we'd built together was just a rough draft she was ready to discard. The breaking point came when she started bringing their advice into our daily interactions. She'd question every decision I made, every suggestion I offered, running it by the group first. Planning a weekend trip to Estes Park. The girls think couples who spend too much time together lose their individual identities. Suggesting we have a quiet night in with takeout. The girls say that sounds boring and old. It was like living with someone who'd been programmed by a committee of bitter women who couldn't stand seeing someone else happy in a relationship they had failed at maintaining. But here's what really got to me: she started treating me like I was the problem. Like I was some controlling husband trying to hold back her true potential, when all I'd ever done was support her dreams and ambitions. I'd encouraged her career changes, celebrated her successes, and never once tried to limit her friendships or activities, until now. Because now, her activities seemed designed specifically to exclude and diminish our marriage. The final straw came when she announced she wouldn't be home for our 7th anniversary. The girls planned a weekend trip to the beach, San Diego, she said. They say anniversary celebrations are just societal pressure to perform happiness. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was no longer married to the woman I fell in love with. I was married to someone who'd outsourced her decision-making to 3 women who'd proven they couldn't make good decisions about their own lives. That's when I knew exactly what needed to happen next. The verdict and the consequences. The anniversary incident was just the appetizer. What came next showed me exactly how deep this poison had spread through my marriage. She came back from that San Diego weekend with a new haircut, new clothes, and what she called clarity about our situation. The 3 of them had apparently spent the entire weekend analyzing Chloe's life like she was some kind of case study. "We need to talk," she said the moment she walked through the door, not even bothering to acknowledge that I'd spent the weekend alone on what should have been our anniversary. I sat down, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to end well. I'd been doing a lot of thinking, and the girls helped me realize something important. She paused, like she was delivering some profound revelation. "I think we need to take a break." A break? I kept my voice steady, but inside I was calculating how quickly this marriage was collapsing. "Not a breakup," she said quickly, as if that made it better. "Just some time apart so I can figure out who I really am without being defined by this relationship." There it was, the classic move every unhappy or cheating spouse tries when they want to keep their safety net while they explore other options. Except she wasn't even hiding where this idea came from. "Let me guess," the girls suggested this. She got defensive immediately. "They're just looking out for me. They've been through this, and they know the signs." "What signs exactly?" "That I'm losing myself. That I got married too young and never had the chance to be independent. That maybe I don't even know what I want because I've never been alone to figure it out." I almost laughed. Here was a woman who'd lived on her own for 3 years before we got married, who'd traveled solo through Europe, who'd built her own career. But apparently, according to her divorced friends, none of that counted as independence. "So what does this break look like?" I asked. "I moved back to my old apartment in Capitol Hill. The lease is actually still available. We don't see each other for maybe 6 months, and then we evaluate where we are. And during these 6 months, are we married or aren't we?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Technically married, but free to explore what we need to explore." There it was. She wanted permission to act single while keeping me as a backup plan. The girls had coached her well. "No." She blinked, like she hadn't heard me correctly. "No. We're not taking a break. We're either married or we're not. There's no trial separation. No 6-month exploration period. No keeping one foot in and one foot out." Her face flushed with anger. "You can't just decide that unilaterally. Actually, I can, just like you can't unilaterally decide to pause our marriage whenever you feel like discovering yourself." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see her texting the group in her head, asking them how to handle a husband who wasn't playing along with their script. "The girls said you'd react like this." They said you try to control the situation instead of supporting my growth. Your growth? You mean your regression into acting like a college student who can't make a decision without consulting her sorority sisters? That hit a nerve. She stood up abruptly. You don't understand what it's like to wonder if you made the right choice. They do. They understand failure. I'll give you that. Don't talk about my friends like that. Your friends? When's the last time any of them asked how you were doing instead of telling you how you should be feeling? She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't, because she knew I was right. Every interaction with that group was them projecting their regrets onto her life. Over the next few weeks, she doubled down on their advice. She started staying out later, sometimes not coming home until the next morning. When I'd ask where she'd been, she'd snap back with responses that sounded like they'd been rehearsed. I'm exploring my independence. I'm learning who I am outside of this relationship. The girls think I've been codependent for too long. She stopped doing anything that resembled being a wife. No more cooking together. No more watching movies on the couch. No more conversations about our future. She treated our house like a hotel where she occasionally slept between adventures with her advisors. The breaking point came when she started bringing their toxic advice into every argument we had. The girls say you're gaslighting me when you point out how much I've changed. According to the group, you're exhibiting classic controlling behavior. They think you're intimidated by my growth and trying to sabotage it. I realized I was no longer arguing with my wife. I was arguing with a committee of bitter women who were using her as their puppet to prove that all marriages were doomed to fail. The final insult came when she announced she was going on a girls' trip to Las Vegas for an entire week. It's my birthday week, she said, as if that explained everything. Your birthday isn't for 3 months. We're celebrating early. The girls planned it as a surprise. And you didn't think to discuss a week-long trip with your husband first? She rolled her eyes. See? This is exactly what they're talking about. You think you get to approve my decisions? I think married people discuss major plans with each other. That's called basic respect. Or control, depending on how you look at it. I stared at her, this stranger wearing my wife's face, and realized she was beyond saving. The girls had successfully convinced her that every normal expectation in a marriage was actually oppression, and every boundary I tried to set was proof of their theory. That night, while she was out celebrating her freedom with the group, I made my own decision. If she wanted to act single so badly, I was going to make sure she got exactly what she was asking for. The ring came off my finger and went into the drawer. If she wanted to be like the girls so much, she could join their club officially. The moment of clarity. She came back from Vegas different again, but not in the way I expected. The triumphant attitude she'd had when she left was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. I barely looked up when she walked in the door, 3 days late from her original return date. I was reading on the couch, my wedding ring notably absent from my finger. Hey, she said quietly, dropping her bags by the door. Hey, yourself. She stood there for a moment like she was waiting for me to ask about her trip. When I didn't, she sat down on the opposite end of the couch. Aren't you going to ask how it went? I turned a page without looking at her. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. She was quiet for several minutes. Then, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in months, she said, I think I made some mistakes. Now that got my attention. I closed the book and looked at her. Really looked at her. She seemed smaller somehow, less confident than the woman who'd been lecturing me about independence and growth. What kind of mistakes? She took a shaky breath. I should have listened to the girls from the beginning. They tried to warn me about what marriage does to women, but I thought I knew better. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't the kind of regret I'd been hoping for. Warn you about what exactly? About how we lose ourselves. How we become these domestic creatures who live for someone else's approval instead of chasing our own dreams. Her voice was picking up steam now, like she was convincing herself as much as me. They were right about everything, about how young I was when I got married, about how I never got to explore who I really am. And I've been fighting against their advice because I was scared to admit they were right. Right about what? That I wasted my 20s playing house instead of living. That I settled for security instead of passion. That I convinced myself this was what I wanted because it was safe and expected. Every word was like a knife, not because I was hurt by her opinion, but because I realized how completely those women had brainwashed her. Tell me about Vegas, I said. Her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't when she looked at me in months. It was incredible. We stayed out until sunrise, met all these interesting people, danced until our feet hurt. I felt alive in a way I haven't felt in years. And what did the girls say about all this? They said it was proof. Proof that I'm meant for more than this suburban married life. They said seeing you come alive like that confirmed everything we've been trying to tell you. I nodded slowly. What else did they say? They said I was brave for finally admitting the truth about what I need. That most women just suffer in silence in marriages that don't fulfill them, but I was strong enough to recognize it and do something about it. Do something about it. How? She looked down at her hands. They think I should file for divorce. Not because they want me to be miserable like them, but because they want me to be happy like they are now. Happy. These three women who spent every weekend desperately trying to recapture something they'd lost. Who complained constantly about being alone. Who needed each other's validation for every single decision they made. That was her definition of happiness now. And what do you think? I think they're right. She met my eyes, and there was something almost defiant there. I think I've been lying to myself about being satisfied with this life. I think I married you because it was expected, not because it was what I truly wanted. She was waiting for me to fight for her, to beg her to reconsider, to promise I'd change or we could work it out. I could see it in her eyes. Instead, I stood up. Where are you going? To get something. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I'd put my wedding ring, and came back with a small velvet engagement ring box, which I'd kept all these years. I set it on the coffee table between us. She stared at that ring box like it was a bomb about to explode, which, in a way, it was. You can't be serious, she whispered. Dead serious. You spent 3 months telling me how wrong this marriage is, how much you regret it. How your friends know better than you do about your own life. Well, congratulations. You've convinced me. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, pulling out my phone. She followed me, panic rising in her voice. What are you doing? Calling my lawyer. You want to be like the girls. They all went through divorces. Time for you to join the club officially. Stop. She grabbed my arm. You're being dramatic. I never said I wanted a divorce. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. Really? Because you just spent 20 minutes explaining how you regret marrying me, how you wasted 7 years of your life, and how your friends were right all along about marriage being a trap. I was just processing my feelings. No, you were delivering a verdict. One that your jury of bitter women helped you reach. And now you get to live with that decision. But I don't actually want to get divorced. What you want stopped being relevant the moment you decided 3 failed women knew more about your marriage than you did. Her face crumpled. Please, can we just talk about this? We've been talking for 3 months. You've made your position crystal clear. You're unhappy. You feel trapped. You regret everything. And your friends think you should leave me. Message received. I dialed the number. She watched in horror as it started ringing. Please, hang up. I held up one finger, gesturing for her to wait. When my lawyer, Mr. Peterson, answered, I spoke clearly and calmly. I need to start divorce proceedings. Yes, irreconcilable differences. No, there's no point in counseling. She's made her decision. She was crying now, but I felt nothing. 3 months of being treated like the enemy in my own home had burned through any sympathy I might have had. After I hung up, she collapsed into a chair. I can't believe you just did that. Believe it. You wanted freedom. You're about to get more freedom than you ever imagined. But what about everything we built together? You just told me you regret building it. That it was all a mistake. That you should have listened to your friends who warned you about marriage. So, we're going to tear it down, and you can start fresh, just like they did. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been very clear about your feelings. She wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. I mean, I regret not understanding myself better before we got married, not that I regret marrying you specifically. Too late for clarification. You've been working with a team of advisors for 3 months, planning your exit strategy, acting single, staying out all night, treating me like an obstacle to your happiness. Well, obstacle removed. They're not advisors. They're my friends. Your friends who are all divorced and miserable. Your friends who can't stand seeing someone else succeed where they failed. Those friends. They're not miserable. They're living authentic lives. Authentic? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your roommate friend is cycling through 3 different guys she met on dating apps, crying to you about how none of them want commitment. Your bar-hopping friend spends every weekend desperately trying to find someone to go home with her, then complains about how all men are trash. And the twice-divorced one is living with her parents at 35. That's authentic living. You don't understand their situations. I understand them perfectly. They're bitter, lonely women who convinced you to throw away a good marriage so you could be miserable right alongside them. She stood up, anger replacing the tears. They care about me. They care about validating their own bad decisions. And you fell for it. So that's it. 7 years down the drain because I had some doubts. 7 years down the drain because you let 3 failures talk you into believing that having doubts meant you needed to blow up your life. I walked back to the living room and picked up the ring box, holding it out to her again. Take it. I don't want it. Take it anyway. You're going to need something to sell when you realize what single life actually costs. She reluctantly took the box, her hands shaking. The papers will be ready in a few days. I suggest you call your friends and let them know the good news. They finally got what they wanted. This isn't what I wanted. It's exactly what you wanted. You just thought you could have it both ways, keep me as backup while you explored your options. Well, there are no backup plans anymore. She looked around the house we'd shared, as if seeing it for the first time. Where am I supposed to go? Remember that apartment you mentioned in Capitol Hill? The one that's still available. Your friends will help you figure it out. They're experts at starting over, after all. I can't afford that place on my own. Should have thought about that before you decided marriage was a prison. The reality was starting to hit her. The freedom her friends had promised came with a price tag she hadn't considered. No shared mortgage, no combined income, no built-in partner to split the bills with. The girls said. I don't want to hear what the girls said ever again. They've said enough. They convinced you to destroy your marriage, and now you get to live with the consequences. She sat back down, the weight of her situation finally sinking in. Can't we try counseling first? Counseling requires 2 people who want to save the marriage. You've made it clear you don't. But I do want to save it. No, you want to avoid the consequences of ending it. There's a difference. I looked at this woman who'd been my wife for 7 years, who'd let 3 bitter strangers convince her to throw away everything good in her life. You made your choice when you decided their opinions mattered more than our marriage. Now you get to live like them. Freedom's price tag. The next few weeks were exactly what I expected, pure desperation disguised as damage control. She didn't move out immediately. Instead, she launched into full panic mode, trying every manipulation tactic her friends had probably coached her through for situations like this. First came the tears, lots of them. She'd follow me around the house, crying about how she'd made a terrible mistake and how she never really meant any of it. I was just confused, she sobbed one morning as I made coffee. The girls got in my head, and I lost sight of what was important. The girls got in your head, I said, not even looking up from my cup. Or did they just say out loud what you were already thinking? No, it wasn't like that. They kept pushing and pushing until I started believing their version of my life instead of trusting my own feelings. Your own feelings were pretty clear when you told me you regretted marrying me. I was just repeating what they said. I didn't mean it. So, you're saying you're easily manipulated and can't think for yourself? That's not exactly helping your case. She switched tactics. The tears stopped, and suddenly she was angry. You're not even trying to fight for us, she accused. If you really loved me, you'd want to work through this. Work through what? You spending 3 months telling me our marriage was a mistake while taking advice from 3 women who couldn't keep their own relationships together. People make mistakes. That's what marriage is about, working through problems together. Marriage is also about respect, loyalty, and not letting outside people poison your relationship. You failed on all 3 counts. When anger didn't work, she tried guilt. What about all our plans? The house we wanted to buy in the suburbs? The kids we talked about having? You mean the plans you told me were just societal pressure? The kids you said would trap you even more? Those plans? She had no answer for that. Then came the bargaining phase. She offered to cut contact with the friends completely. I'll block all of them right now. Delete their numbers. Leave the group chat. Everything. Too late. The damage is done. But if I remove the bad influence? You are the bad influence. They didn't force you to treat me like garbage for 3 months. They didn't make you stay out all night or stop being a wife. You chose all of that. I can change. Into what? The person you were before they got to you. That person let 3 failures convince her to blow up her marriage. Why would I want her back? The most pathetic attempt came when she tried to blame everything entirely on her friends, as if she'd been some innocent victim. They manipulated me, she cried. They preyed on my insecurities and made me doubt everything good in my life. Funny how those insecurities never bothered you until they showed up. They were always there. I just ignored them. So, you're saying you've been unhappy our entire marriage, but hid it well. She realized that logic trap immediately. No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Either you were happy and they convinced you to be miserable, or you were already miserable and they just gave you permission to admit it. Either way, this marriage is over. But the real entertainment started when her friends realized I was serious about the divorce. She came home one evening looking shell-shocked. The girls want to meet with you. I almost laughed. Excuse me. They feel bad about how everything turned out. They want to explain that they never meant for it to go this far. Let me get this straight. The same women who spent 3 months convincing you to leave me now want to convince me to take you back. They realize they might have given bad advice. Might have. They're worried about me, about how I'll manage on my own. I thought they were experts on independent living. She shifted uncomfortably. It's different when it's actually happening. You mean it's different when there are real consequences instead of just fantasy talk about freedom and self-discovery? The truth was starting to come out. Her friends were panicking because they realized they'd pushed too hard. They wanted their validation puppet back in a safe marriage so they could continue living vicariously through her drama without the guilt of actually destroying her life. They said they'll talk to you. Explain how they were just trying to help me grow. No. You won't even listen to them. Why would I take relationship advice from three women whose combined relationship experience is a series of spectacular failures? They're not failures. They just haven't found the right situation yet. They're in their 30s, living like college students and giving marriage advice. If that's not failure, I don't know what is. She tried one last desperate play. She showed up one evening with her wedding dress. "Look what I found," she said, holding it up like some kind of peace offering. "Remember our wedding day? How happy we were. I remember our wedding day. I also remember you telling me 3 weeks ago that you regretted it and should have listened to your friends who tried to warn you against getting married. I was wrong. You were honest. For the first time in months, you told me exactly how you felt. I'm just giving you what you said you wanted. But what if I changed my mind? Then you'll change it again the next time your friends decide you're missing out on something. I'm not interested in being married to someone whose feelings about our relationship depend on which group of people she talked to most recently." The papers were finalized on a Thursday. She signed them with shaking hands, still hoping I'd change my mind at the last second. I didn't. As she packed her things, I watched her call her friends for emotional support. The same friends who'd convinced her this was what she needed. But their enthusiasm had dimmed considerably once they realized they'd actually succeeded in destroying her marriage. Suddenly, they were all too busy to help her move, too stressed with their own problems to offer the couch they'd promised, too broke to help with the security deposit on that Capitol Hill apartment. Reality had a way of exposing fair-weather advisors. She left on a Saturday morning with 3 suitcases and a lot of regret. As I watched her drive away, I felt nothing but relief. The woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who valued the opinions of failures over the love of her husband. She got exactly what she'd asked for, the freedom to be just like her friends. Now she could discover firsthand what that freedom actually cost. Class is in session. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into one of her old co-workers at a King Soopers grocery store. What he told me confirmed everything I'd predicted about my ex-wife, Chloe's new, authentic life. "She's been asking everyone if they know any single guys," the coworker said, shaking his head. "It's kind of sad, actually. She seems desperate." Desperate? The same woman who'd lectured me about independence and self-discovery was now frantically trying to replace what she'd thrown away. "How's she handling the single life?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Not well. She moved into this tiny studio apartment because she couldn't afford anything bigger. She's working overtime just to cover rent and bills. And she keeps talking about how expensive everything is when you don't have someone to split costs with." The financial reality had hit hard, just like I knew it would. Those girls' trips to Vegas and weekend adventures suddenly weren't so appealing when they came out of a single paycheck instead of shared household income. What about her friends? The ones who gave her all that great advice? The coworker rolled his eyes. "That's the interesting part. Apparently, they've been avoiding her lately. She mentioned something about them being too busy with their own drama to hang out as much." Of course, they were. Mission accomplished. Puppet strings cut. They'd gotten their validation by proving that all marriages end in divorce, and now they didn't need her anymore. I thought about those 3 women who'd convinced my ex-wife to destroy her life. Skylar, her college roommate, was already on dating app number 5, cycling through men who wouldn't commit because she trained them not to. Brittany, the bar-hopping friend, had moved back in with her parents after a failed relationship with a guy she'd met during one of those authentic living weekends. Madison, the twice-divorced one, was now working on relationship number 4, convinced this time would be different. These were the life coaches my ex-wife had chosen over 7 years of marriage. A few weeks later, she started texting me, not the angry, bitter messages I'd expected, but something much more pathetic. "I know I messed up everything between us, but I wanted you to know I'm doing okay." She wasn't doing okay. That much was obvious. "I joined a yoga class and I'm learning to cook for one. It's actually kind of liberating. Liberating. She was trying to convince herself that eating frozen dinners alone in a studio apartment was somehow better than the life we built together. The girls were right about one thing. I'm definitely learning who I am outside of a relationship. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered 3 months of being treated like the enemy in my own home. 3 months of having every conversation infected by the toxic advice of 3 bitter women. 3 months of watching my wife transform into someone I didn't recognize. I didn't respond to her texts. A month later, I heard through mutual friends that she'd started dating some guy she'd met at work who was recently divorced himself. According to the gossip, she was already talking about moving in together because she couldn't afford her rent anymore. From a stable marriage to cohabitation with a stranger in less than a year. So much for self-discovery and independence. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd thrown away a stable, loving marriage because her friends convinced her she was missing out on something better. Now she was settling for whatever she could get just to avoid being alone. I, on the other hand, was thriving without the constant negativity and drama she'd brought into our home during those final months. I'd rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I was sleeping better, eating better, and actually enjoying my life again. The house felt peaceful instead of like a battlefield. I could make plans without wondering if they'd be cancelled because the girls had something more important planned. Most importantly, I'd learned to recognize the red flags I'd missed before. The way she'd started prioritizing outside opinions over our partnership. The way she'd begun treating our marriage like a burden instead of a choice she made every day. The way she'd allowed bitter people to poison something good, because misery truly does love company. I started dating again after a year, not because I was lonely or desperate, but because I was ready to find someone who understood that a relationship requires 2 people committed to building something together, not one person constantly looking for reasons to tear it down. When friends asked if I regretted how things ended, I always gave them the same answer: I regretted that it took me so long to realize who she'd become. She'd wanted to be like her friends so badly. She got her wish. She joined their club of divorced women who spent their weekends desperately trying to recreate the happiness they'd convinced themselves they were missing. The difference was, her friends had gotten divorced because their marriages actually had problems. She'd gotten divorced because she let them convince her that happiness was a problem. She'd had everything she claimed to want: love, partnership, security, future plans, and threw it away because 3 failures told her she should. That wasn't my loss. That was hers. And now, sitting alone in her studio apartment, working overtime to afford the independent life she'd been so sure she needed, she was finally getting the education she'd been asking for. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. She'd regretted not listening to the girls sooner. I'd made sure she'd never have to live with that regret again. Now she could be exactly like them, divorced, struggling, and desperately searching for what she'd already had and thrown away. Class was in session, and reality was a harsh teacher.